Yo, Jamie, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I realized two things that I had this little ticker at the bottom still on while running the whole intro, but I also was dancing like nobody's watching because that theme song has still is has not gotten old.
No.
5 years, and I still love it. So maybe we gotta do this switch shout outs to this one here. One more shout out
Yes.
to Charlie because you know he's my brother, so I'm biased. I can be
Very
biased.
nice. No. It's good. I mean, like I'm enjoying it. Always have. So, and I'm very excited, for him to have his EP out. So,
Yeah, I think I need to update this link and find the direct link. I said I was going to do that. I didn't do that yet, so we'll come around to that. But anyway,
show
let's
notes, as they say, right? Right. Show notes,
in
as they say.
in the show notes. Yes. So yeah, so we're live on YouTube and Twitch. So just so people know, right? This is my marketing strategy for the year.
Well, I mean,
Informational.
I'm finding that you say marketing strategy. It's like I'm finding very natural ways to, hey, did I mention that, I've been doing this podcast for a while, with people in conversations lately. So it's been pretty great. Um, was at a conference in the last couple days, our state preservation conference. Actually met a podcaster
Well,
who does a podcast focused on Galveston's history. Um, and he was like, "Oh, you podcast? Wow, architect. What is it?" So showed it to him, and then he's like, "Wow, sketches. This is interesting." He's like, "Would you guys come to Galveston?" So
well, we
shout out
were.
to yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I know, right? I didn't. I was like, go to episode, um, go back on the way back. It's about like what two seasons ago. Um, but
Oh,
yeah, no, it's
three,
more than
maybe.
that. Three, yeah. Gosh. Yeah, with the biggest IMAX ever, Kurt on the big screen, because Jamie was curating a Pechacucha. I'm sorry, I'm still going to call it that.
Pachacha,
Um,
pacha,
no matter how many,
pachacha,
yeah, no
pachacha,
matter how many
pachacha.
times they send me emails, encourage me to use the right name. Um, Texas Society of Architects, Pechacucha, statewide curation, 2 years, actually three, but it's okay. And my buddy gets on the big mic on the big IMAX screen, so it was fun.
It was fun.
Lots of good people in that, and really enjoyed it. And Galveston was fun. So Galveston Unscripted is the other podcast, um, and learned a few of his tips, tricks, and thoughts on the medium. So it was fun.
Yeah, that's cool. You better document Galveston while it's still there. No,
Well, yeah,
no offense. It's
no,
that coastal town. It's an interesting place. When we were walking around there, kind of walking, talking, grabbing a beer somewhere.
with Sterling, yeah.
Yeah, in that island town. It's an island, right? Or is it a
No, it's just
peninsula?
on the coast. It's just on the coast.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. My
But
bad.
it's got all those, it has barrier island sort of
Ah,
built up, kind of to help. But yeah, the seawall.
seawall, right? Well, so how's that's thanks for sharing that with that conference meetup, and we'll have to check out unscripted Galveston unscripted. But what is unscripted in your coffee cup today,
Um,
my friend?
I have still the Grackle, but this is the last one. So
special.
Yeah.
Special for us. Well, I'm going to do a little pop culture uh,
What about yourself?
current
What
events.
about yourself?
Yeah, I know that's my segue to
Oh,
pop culture. So uh, Danielle has acquired. She thought she might give it a try. This coffee that also so it's like an instant coffee, but it also has some mushrooms in it. Like
okay.
I don't know. You know, it's supposed to be good for you. You know, fungi. It's
Okay.
supposed. But have you watched The Last of Us, the
No,
TV show?
no, but like I almost did it this weekend. I was really tempted because I mean, it was sort of it had been recommended to me when it was coming out, and they're like, "Get on this, watch this." I was like, "Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting." And then they said, there's even like these sort of pseudo references to like Austin in like
Oh,
the backdrop and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And then they said, and then when episode 3 came out, apparently episode 3 was like this like
yeah,
beautiful thing,
yeah,
and so I'm hearing lots about it. I assume by your reference, you guys have been watching.
yeah. We've been watching it, and so the mushroom cordyceps is a kind of mushroom, and a mycelium, a fungi. I don't know what you know about mushrooms, but they have a very large network of connectivity underground. I mean, there's a lot of fascinating spatial concepts that mushrooms we could learn from mushrooms on. But
They're also really good on a pepperoni pizza. So
yes, and also in this TV show, The Last of Us. But if you since you haven't watched it, I'm not going to spoil it. But for those of our listeners that do watch it, they will they might think twice about drinking things with mushrooms in them. That's all I'm going to say. But the yeah, no, that episode 3. I mean, this is like, I mean, I don't want to get into it too much, but it's based off. It's a video game, right? It's like a video
that's
game
what I
being
heard.
turned
Mm-hmm.
into a TV show, which always can have its problems or issues, I guess, with translation and things like that. But yeah, after watching episode 3, Danielle and I were eating breakfast the next day, and I was just thinking like that could be one of the best one episode things I've ever seen of any show ever. It was so well done. The story they put, it's like, an hour long episode, but they were able to capture so much storyline, backstory, history, um, and in this relationship. And I'm not going to give it away to you because I don't want to sort of spoil
No. I
the
mean,
whole surprise.
it is going to be a watch. So I appreciate that. But I mean, it's also sort of has a dystopian architecture kind of,
Oh yeah,
you know,
oh yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, well, and I say that because, and I know only because, on the Twitters, there's quite a few set designers and, kind of film people that I've started to follow, or I've been not started. I've been following for quite a while, and so I think that bleeding between art, architecture, film, form following fiction has always been ever present in kind of my interest areas. So I've seen some of the kind of background art, production design for the series, and then them kind of calling between the series and the video game and things like that. And so it's been really interesting to just look at that. Definitely piqued my interest. It is going to be the next thing for sure.
Yeah, good.
So I can catch up.
It's a good. Yeah,
You know.
and we'll just come back to it. Once you've gotten into it, because now so it's one of those where it's not like they dump all the episodes online. So
Right.
we're still only 4 episodes in, and so anyway, there's the oh, she's got to collect the dog. Hello, D. So anyway, what should we do next? Should we bring
Well, I
in
was
our
going to say, yeah,
or
you
do
can
you
bring in
want?
the sketch because I think there's a bit of a transition to that sort of art, film, architecture thing.
Yeah, so we have a sketch and some reference material, but I won't get into the. We'll start with the sketch, or I guess sketches. We have two that happen on two different days on facing pages, and I'm kind of mask out Danielle. so so yeah, we'll try and do some editing magic, right? But anyway, so Jamie, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about what we have here, and then I'll jump back in.
Yeah, no, I think we were sort of talking a little bit about film and art and architecture and sort of the parallels to some of our interests, and then some of the sketches of late, folks that we follow, things that we're watching on TV, all that good stuff, or streaming. And I think the sketch on the left in the book, done the day before, done this week, but done the day before the one on the right, and it really kind of garnered a few kind of comments from folks when I tagged it as Lebbeus Woods, and it was one where I had read an article, that day, that there was a new exhibit of some of his sketches and drawings, I believe in LA, that was opening soon, or had just opened, and a lot of it related to this connection of architecture and his relationship to film, and his kind of as an influencer of it, and sometimes production designer, and sometimes kind of rebel maverick architect. So it was, and there were some drawings in there I'd never seen before, and so one of them was this kind of cathedral-like space, and so I just kind of pulled, left it up on the screen and sort of tried to riff on it a little bit. So some of it's him and some of it's me, and but sometimes when I'm reading things like that and kind of want to make those kind of connections to my own memory, that's where some of these sketches reside.
Well, that's cool. I love when we talk about Lebbeus Wood stuff, because strong reference. Actually, it's very interesting the subtle segues that we've had from pop culture. I call it pop culture, but I guess it's just current events TV, what's out there, the dystopian conditions that we have in like The Last of Us, and in a lot of Jamie's sketches. So maybe Jamie needs to ping some of these Hollywood people types and say, "Hey, do you need help? I got a lot of
I got a lot of stuff trapped up in here. Let's get it all. Like, there is a gas mask over my shoulder. There it is.
Yes.
The logo for Fallout Studio, when it was more than just a passion project, was a gas mask, and so kind of a silhouette coming out of a photography project in college.
Right. Yeah, we touch base often, probably more than once on that thing, but it's good to bring it back every now and then, because
it doesn't go. It sort of just lives right there. It's like over the shoulder. Yeah.
But the Lebbeus stuff, I can't remember if I've ever seen anything of his in real life in an exhibit, but it's one of those things that we in school did things like go to the library, architecture library, and pore over the various monographs and books and croquis. And I know we talk about this probably a lot, but just to say it again, that the information is out there if you know where to find it. And
Well, and you say that like in the real life, I've never seen any of like he's done, he's had drawings. I think I've seen, I shouldn't say I don't think I have. I've seen one of his drawings exhibited um, in New York. Um, and actually, when we were at um, like the convention in New York, it kind of reminded me of a lot of those things. But I saw a drawing of his exhibited in New York. But my first trip to New York City, um, I actually got to listen to Lebius give a lecture in person. And at that point, exactly what you were describing. I had been going to the library and poring over all of these books and seeing these amazing drawings, and was like, "Who is this person?" And when I found out that he was a professor in New York and a practicing architect in New York, and had this sort of strange relationship to research and manifestos and whatnot, um, the minute I heard that there was this opportunity to go to a lecture on my first trip to Manhattan in my entire life, yeah, that was not going to be missed. So it that those things have indelible marks on probably my creativity and psyche and whatever.
where was it hosted, the lecture?
At Cooper Union.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was the American Institute of Architects students, AIAS, architecture students. Their national forum that year was in Washington, D.C., but creatively, they decided that they would have a pre-forum in New York City. So if you were kind of adventurous enough, you flew into DC, took a train to New York, and like had and they build it as like, you're only in New York for this amount of time. We're going to keep you up as long as we can, and you're only going to sleep like one night, and you're at the center of the universe. And so it was like, I mean, we watched Taxi Driver at midnight, a midnight show of Taxi Driver. I mean, it was like they were keeping us up like as much as they could to cram in as much about New York at that time. It was insane, but Lebius was one of the speakers, which just added to the whole level of like, this is not a real place.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's got to be a kind of a Hunter S. Thompson
Yes,
style event.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, New York. Well, growing up on the East Coast, it's called the city.
Right.
We call it the city. I grew up in Connecticut, but not the fancy schmancy part of But
Well,
anyhow.
and my folks would go down to New York. I mean, from Montreal. I mean, it was like, it was a drive. I mean, clearly a jaunt, but like they'd go to the city, and now I'm a little older, so I hear a few more stories about what that was sort of like. And it was, they loved live music. I mean, that was sort of the thing, was, um, you know, those kinds of ventures, I think, involved a lot of that as well. So, but yeah, it's the city. It's the center of the universe, as I like to affectionately refer to it.
Yeah, and so like with Levius's style of drawings in his exploration, always a lot of verticality, high rise, the density of New York, and things like that. And so there's that sort of sense of that the z-axis, the vertical, the height of this thing, which is kind of fun that you paired it with this other sketch on the other side of the page, which is, oddly enough, it's one of those moments where you and I have known each other. I was just thinking about this the other day, because it goes back almost 10 years now, when we first met at our AIA committee meeting for the Young Architects Forum. I think it was Well, I think what was it, 2014 or 13?
14.
14, yeah. So we're 9 years, But who's
Yeah,
counting?
I mean, it's all those national responsibilities that we're fortunate to have had like almost a decade ago. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. After 10 years, and then
no
I mean,
stopping us now. No
that's
stopping us
right.
now.
In
Yeah.
5 years into this podcast, but you posted this sketch on the right on Instagram, and I immediately was thinking of a building. I was like, that reminds me of this Michael Rotundi building that I remember when I was in LA as a student, and he was lecturing at either SciArc or USC, wherever I saw him in town, because he had his office in LA, which he still does. Um, but he I think had just recently finished this building in the early 2000s, somewhere around there, late 90s, 2000s. Um, and it's a Michael Rotundi. It's a house, I believe, but it's like out in the country. I forget. It's like in Big Sky country, I think, like Montana or somewhere out there. And I'll cheat over to the right. But anyway, so before I get to the photographs, I saw your sketch and immediately made me think of that building. And so as we were preparing for today, I was like, oh yeah, this sketch here. And then I grabbed the screenshot of the Rotundi house, and sure enough, it was what you your inspiration. So what I'm trying to say is, after all this time, that you and I are starting to, just like mushrooms are, have a hive mind underground. I guess our brains are interconnected.
Well, I think it's sort of also oh, sweetie. It's sort of a generational thing too. I mean, there's generational influences, but it's also, I think it's even beyond generational, and I think it's more about it's there's process influences. I think that there's things about an approach to architecture. Um, it's we haven't talked a whole lot about the line in that's going on
No, Saudi.
in Saudi Arabia, which I mean we can, I think we probably should at some point, because it's an interesting and strange conflagration.
Oh, right,
Um,
right.
but
Especially with this architecture.
right, but I think that it's as much as that's being talked about quite a bit right now and starting to get, I think that there's definitely some influence in the work that you and I are interested in process wise, and and these sketches are sort of that connection to it for me at times. um, you know the mycelial network that you're referring to, I think is, yeah, it's, that's the, oops. Um, there are things that sort of pique your interest or you stumble across and you realize, oh, wow, and then you start talking to somebody and they're like, oh, yeah, I was kind of reading or thinking about, and there's a sort of kismet moment, um, where things just sort of connect on a different level. And I think it's the circles that you find yourself in. It's, finding your tribe too.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with that. The tribe.
But I think that when I say generational, I don't mean like, Gen Xer here, talking about it, but it's, that I really am interested in, people who draw and process and share those kinds of thoughts on paper or digitally, and kind of work through those schemes, and you can sort of see in that image. And that's what I tried to pick up here is, I know Roto, from studying him and then also teaching with him, when I was at Prairie View, and and then continuing to connect with him every once in a while. But I know these projects, from a distance, but at the same time, there's a familiarity because you've had at least a little bit of connection with them. And towers are hard, and they've been sort of on my mind lately, of these sort of vertical pieces, of architecture, and his project sort of was the one that kind of came to my mind, similar to yours, your thought, kind of, and sort of sketching it out, and then starting to sketch it out, and then actually going and seeking some of the imagery of it, and then riffing off of it, in sort of a different way, purposefully. So yeah, it's I'm glad that it sparked that an immediate connection for you, because that's it's influence. I mean, it's not that that's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing if people hide it, or don't acknowledge what's come before, or where some of those ideas maybe come from. But I mean, what wasn't it like T.S. Eliot? It's immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. So
right. I've also heard the one, good artists. Oh shoot! Now I can't remember. Oh yeah. Good artists copy, great artists steal. Similarly, right? And steal from each other. But yeah, towers, like you said, are hard, especially if they're honestly. Well, we're not talking about skyscrapers here. This Michael Rotundi design is like a single family house, but it's a very vertical structure, and sort of confined to, like, say one or two functions per floor plate, right? So it's like living room stacked with kitchen and bath maybe, and then bedrooms, and it becomes this a layer of plates, floor plates, or however you want to describe it. But and then so culminating with like a viewing deck on the roof, which I think to me is like kind of always the interesting aspect of, you start moving up, right? Then you're changing your perspective at every level, and then having this sort of rooftop vantage point as the top of the sort of it's like, why do people climb mountains, right? I mean, I
well,
don't know if that sounds too much like trying
no,
to connect these things, but
but it's Glenn Murcutt lectured at A&M when I was in school, and one of the things that he said was this sort of concept of living lightly on the land, in kind of reference to his work. And then, he had a big influence on Brian McKay Lyons out of Nova Scotia. And it's like McKay Lyons Sweet Apple, I think, is the firm now. And I think in sort of the spirit of those two architects who, are sort of theorists and teachers, and really principled in sort of their design approach and sort of the architecture that they're sort of seeking. It's very akin to Rotundi, as much as Rotundi's sort of on his own journey with it. But I think that in a work like this, you could probably put a Brian McKay Lyons building in Nova Scotia up, next to this one by Rotundi, and have a really, really interesting dialogue about both, not about the architects, but about the things that they're seeking to solve. And it's sort of that living lightly on the land, creating a small floor plate, but at the same time having goals about the project where you're kind of getting up so that you can sort of have these vistas and vantage points. You're kind of creating this architectural folly at the same time. So it's almost like a shoomy folly, not red. And
Oh, there's a little red column right there.
right. But I think that all those things sort of are coalescing in sort of my own little sketch here, where I'm, like I said, riffing off this idea of what Rotundi's doing, but at the same time, sort of intrinsically thinking, how does this sort of sit in a landscape, and could this be a part of some other thing? So what you're seeing off to the left of the tower is actually sort of an exploration of plan. And so, like, what if you had a site that starts at one spot, and amidst that, can you have a series of rooms that are exterior, that are joined in a place that ends up with a tower at the end? And that was sort of the idea that I was exploring. Of course, it's only one sketch. I'm doing it relatively quickly. So, and then Livius,
So you're saying like
Livius the day before. So like there's this sort of other thing kind of going on too.
So you're saying like this, I'm going to use my highlighter, but this here is a sort of progressive floor plan.
Yes.
So it's like one large composition of pavilions or moments along this pathway.
Yes.
With different room configurations. With also has this interesting site element of the just a couple of lines that sort of reflect how it engages the landscape, and then ends in this tower, which one of these days we'll have to go back to like talking about Nazca lines and all that stuff, which I don't know if we've ever talked about it in much detail, and it's one of those things that
it's going to be our X-Files episode.
It should be, yeah. But after 20 years of working in this field, I'm just now starting to understand what I learned from Tom Main 20 years ago in lectures about his infatuation with the Nazca lines. And I'm not going to get into the net, but in general, just like I guess the maturity it takes to digest on this stuff for so long. And then I recently I was on Google. We have technology to watch Google Maps, and you can go to Peru and look at all the Nazca lines, and it's like still mind blowing with like what these things mean. And then I recently had watched a documentary, I think, that sort of touched on it. Anyway, but I'm going to get too far off topic with that.
No,
but the idea of like that's kind of what I see here too, though. It's a you have these. It's a procession, right, of spaces, and
right.
then
Well,
you've arrived at something that then is the vertical node or stake in the ground.
Well, and I like that you sort of talk about sort of recognizes the things that you remember early in your career, and how maybe you had a different viewpoint for them then than you do now, and that's natural, right? I mean, but that doesn't mean that you were a bad designer then and a good designer now. It just means that you're on your own evolutionary path. And I think that that's what I find with myself is that I mean, there's certainly moments where you're sort of self-critical about all this stuff, and it's I've joked at times, outwardly and then also inwardly talking about it, but sort of saying, I feel like there's a couple spots along that timeline where you really feel like you've matured as a designer, and not matured like in age, but in like the things that you've been trying to absorb suddenly start to make more sense, and that can happen year one, but it's when you're in year 10 or 15 or 20 where you can go back to that stuff that was in year one and go, some of that stuff still was applicable here. And 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 some of those influences that might have seemed you know where I was rebelling or this or that, or some kind of rabbit hole that you're going down, that's what, like, I mean, why do you study history then? Like, why is in the first year of your architecture curriculum, or really any curriculum, it's you're learning from it. You're learning from those influences. And hopefully you're also, now more so, realizing that there's lots of histories that we don't know about, that we should have known about, that we should have studied. You and I've talked about this plenty of times. And so as those things start to kind of filter in, it's not that those supplant the things that were there before. It's that the things that were there before get now influenced by this other layer of stuff. And that's, to me, the kind of the interesting thing. I mean, I'll just say this is that I had a really great conversation with my dad a week ago, because he's like, hey, he was, calling. He's like, hey, what are you doing? How's it going? Middle of the week. I said, oh, well, I'm about to watch a show. I'm really excited about it. I was like, so I can't talk for too long. He's like, oh, well, what are you going to watch? And I was like, oh, well, PBS has this new documentary coming out, and Chuck D is the executive producer of it, and sort of has put this whole thing, kind of curated this whole thing about the first 50 years of hip hop. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'll let you get to your show. And then, like, the next day, I'm getting these text messages from him, like, about the show, because he watched it. Like, he watched the whole thing. And he's like, now watching, like, because the second one was this week. And it's stuff that musically is somewhat familiar to him. I mean, again, like I said, he has a real kind of passion for music. But, Dad's in his 80s, right? So I think that kind of, you can still learn new stuff, and you can let it influence you. So, this stuff for us is very familiar, even though it's, this building that you've got on the screen is like almost 20 years old, right? Mm-hmm. But for somebody who's seeing it for the first time, it's brand new, at least as a concept. And then when you start to thread that concept to other things, that's where it starts to get exciting, because, some of those things, if it's done and executed really well, can really have a much more lasting influence. And then it's like, okay, well, then what's next? And I think that's the thing that I kind of always appreciate about history, is I want to learn stuff and then talk about what's next. So.
Yeah, thanks. Well said.
I went down like a whole little.
No, that's great. I think I appreciate the fact that it is about always willing to be to learn something, and then have ability to take away. And so I hope that between you and me doing this for 5 years now, that we are getting that point across, and that some, our listeners feel the same way, and gain something out of this. So, thanks for these fun sketches and the conversation. I'll talk to you on the next one.
Thanks, Kurt.